You are listening to Off the Shelf, a podcast by The Conference Board.
Hi, everyone. My name is Robin Erickson, and I'm a principal researcher in the Human Capital Center at the Conference Board. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Off the Shelf, a podcast series brought to you by the Conference Board. The world of work is constantly changing due to advances in technology, remote working, and the various crises that have been triggered in the last year. However, something that has remained constant throughout these challenges is the need for businesses to engage and retain talent. Employees not only want, but expect their workplace to provide meaningful work, supportive bosses, regular recognition, and opportunities to learn and grow. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Beverly Kaye, Senior Fellow at the Conference Board, internationally renowned talent management expert and co-author of the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Love 'Em or Lose 'Em, the 6th edition, Getting Good People to Stay. This cleverly titled book outlines how organizations can create and sustain a culture of belonging in which employees feel valued, along with strategies that managers can use to engage and retain their employees. So hi, Bev, could you start us off by talking about the title of your book? What are some of the ways managers can express love to their employees, and what are some of the top reasons that organizations lose their talent?
Sure. And let me start with the word love, because it's not a common word in the business lexicon. And when we first said this is the title, our publisher said, does it have to be the word love? Because will businesses buy it? Because it's a business book. It's for managers in organizations around the world. And we convinced him by saying no other word but love stands for care for, stands for recognize, stands for congratulate, stands for all those things. And it's funny now, 20 years later, love is an accepted word. And anyone who doesn't want to use it can substitute any other word they want. But it really is about caring for your people. It really is about growing your people. It's about all those things. And you lose them by not doing any of those things or not even noticing they're there and noticing what they do every day. So I don't want to make it too simple, because nothing is that simple. But it is about maybe treating people the way you'd want to be treated. And if you don't love them, you will lose them. And you'll lose them physically or psychologically. And maybe the second is worst, because those who quit and stay, that attitude rubs off on everybody else. So I love the title. I fall more in love with the title every time I write a new edition.
Well, and Bev, I love the title too, especially because I think what you're just describing about losing your employees psychologically has to do with the low levels of engagement that we see. And so the book is about engagement, and each chapter of the book is a different strategy. It's organized by the letters of the alphabet, so very easy to follow. And I was especially impressed that you got a Q and a Z and an X in there. But in order to teach these 26 concepts, when you're training people in organizations, you decided to cluster these 26 concepts into 4 groups: development and growth, relationships, right, culture, and success drivers. So why don't you tell us a little about each of the 4 groups?
Right. And we suffered doing that, because if somebody with eagle eyes really looked at each chapter we put in which cluster, you could exchange a lot of them. But it was the easiest way to teach the 26. And we realized that not only was it an easy way to teach the 26, it is what engagement is all about. Engagement is all about that first cluster, which is grow your people, develop your people. And we know from all of the big surveys that one of the major reasons people leave is I don't see a future for myself here. I don't see a next step here. And most of the time, there is a next step. It just was never made clear or never discussed. So, in that cluster of chapters are things like goals, plural, meaning have many goals. So, if one is thwarted, there are others. And I think a big one is link, meaning have a network. If you want to grow, there are lots of people who can teach you how to grow and how to get more of what you want. So all the letters in that cluster relate to the idea of manager. There are some things you can do. And by the way, employees, don't count on your manager to do them. You can do these for yourself too. So that one cluster that comes first, and it's first because we do have a survey. And when we look at the survey and we say which cluster gets the lowest scores, it usually is the development and growth cluster. So the second cluster is relationships. And we know, I think we all know in our heart of hearts, that you stay if there is a great relationship between you and your boss and you and your colleagues. And that second chapter on relationships talks about how important all the different relationships are. And managers who work to build them, managers who work to tell the truth and give people feedback, managers who work to listen. I mean, really listen and understand what their people are saying. We'll build a better relationship and we'll learn more about those individuals. So relationships are critical. And the third cluster is culture. And, we always say, do you want to jump out of bed in the morning? Even though nowadays with COVID, bed could be right next door to your screen where you're going to do your Zoom call. But do you look forward to going to work? Is the culture something that is supportive? And one of the chapters in culture is space. And boy, has COVID ever changed that. Because now for many people, your space is your home. And does that work for you? And for many people that are going back to work in organizations, what will change about their workspace? What have they learned about themselves from being at home that they want to bring back to the office? And what are they looking forward to going back to? So culture meaning everything in your culture, from your workspace to your workplace to what it's like to live and breathe in that culture. And then there are 4 we call success indicators that are common to all of those things. And they are ask. Each chapter demands that a manager ask. And ask is where we got the idea of stay interviews. So we say, and this is a to-do that anybody out there can do, ask your people why they stay. Not at the exit interview when they have one foot out the door. And listen hard to what the reasons are for people staying. And think how many of those reasons can you deliver on? And when we ask managers to have stay interviews and they say, well, what if I ask that question and someone says more money or that job over there in that department and I can't give it? Aren't I in worth trouble? And we say, no, you're not. Tell the truth. Say, I can't deliver on that right now. What else matters? And if you ask that enough, you will get something that you can do something about. And the B in love 'em is buck. I'd say 90% it stops with the manager. Not all, but a good percentage is something that you can do something about. And so you have to think about your role in this whole retention engagement equation. And the other two letters are N for numbers, run them. Look how expensive it is to lose talent. And the Z is for zenith, meaning if you think you can do this and say, done, I'm finished, I've retained, I've engaged, think again, because it's never done. And I'm sorry to say that, but it's your ongoing responsibility as a leader, as a manager, to keep the great talent that your organization has invested in.
Completely agree. And I love that the success indicators have start with A and end with Z. And also kudos to you and your co-author for creating the idea of a stay interview. I had heard about stay interviews 10 or 15 years ago, long before I ever came to the conference board. So it's nice to know the
Great.
person who created those. So thank you for that. One of the things that is different about your book, you've updated the 6th edition of the book with a new emphasis on diversity and inclusion, given all of the new cultural awareness and sensitivity, especially over the last year. So tell our listeners where you decided to include diversity and inclusion in the book.
So it was our publisher, much smarter than we are, who asked for this to be included in the 6th edition. And Sharon and I said, well, we already put it all into the D for dignity chapter. And the subtitle is It's All About Trust. And he said, well, I don't think so. I think it's in every chapter. And we look at each other and said, huh? Because we're not diversity, inclusion, specialists. And the interesting thing we found as we looked in every chapter was that if you want to include people, you better do A through Z. You better ask. You better care about careers, which is C. You better grow them in their jobs, enrich, which is E. And then I thought, well, maybe there are, just like there were other clusters, maybe there's a cluster that we would name belonging, because that's another word in the inclusion world. And we went to inclusion thought leaders, diversity thought leaders, and we said, which 5 of these most support belonging? And other than the D for dignity, because you can't pick that. And we thought we'll get a whole new theory. And what we learned is they all picked a different 5, which ratified the idea that all of these are bottom line crucial to inclusion and crucial to the feeling of belonging. And it gave me a whole new set of glasses to look at those 26 ideas and say, not only will you engage, but you'll probably include by doing these things. And by including, you'll foster that feeling of belonging with all your people. And happily, the world is underscoring those words now. So it fits.
Oh, some places are actually talking about DEIB, diversity,
That's right.
equity, inclusion, and belonging. So I've actually seen
That's
that.
right. I do too. I see it too.
So I actually have one more question for you, which is probably not fair because you've just given us so much advice for how managers can and leaders can retain their employees, but engage them. But what one final piece of advice would you give our listeners on how to best manage, engage, and retain their employees?
Maybe it goes back to the golden rule, which is do for others what you want for yourself. And now with diversity, inclusion, belonging, it's the platinum rule, which is do for others the way they want to be done too. So it means getting to know every individual and finding out what's important and finding out what matters. In fact, those of you listening, get a hold of the table of contents to this book and just use that. If you're a manager, hold it up to each one of your employees one-on-one and say, which of these 26 should I do more of? And then if you have the book, read that chapter, read those 2 chapters, and see if you can find something that you can do more of, because this doesn't have to be hard. It has to be common sense. It has to be.
I love your suggestion. It's an easy place to start. And the book is actually written in such a way that it's easy to read. It's not one of those dense management guides that could put somebody to sleep. So it's definitely written in a more informal tone. So thank you so much for all of your insights, Bev, and for being part of our thought leadership here at the Conference Board as a senior fellow. And to our listeners, I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast and have picked up some ideas about how leaders can address their employees' concerns, keep them engaged, and ultimately retained. If you'd like to find out more, please visit our website at tcb.org/podcasts or /webcasts for more interactive programs and other books on the Off the Shelf podcast. And you can also find our podcasts on other platforms like iTunes or Spotify. Thanks again and have a great day.
This has been Off the Shelf, a podcast by the Conference Board.